Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into a mountain of material, pulling out the crucial insights about American citizenship, and specifically, the powerful forces that seem to be rocking its very foundations right now.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We're unpacking key perspectives. We've got a stack of sources, including one called Dismantling the Republic. The goal is really to help you cut through the noise, understand what citizenship means today, and grasp the implications for all of us.
That's right. Think of this as a journey, a guided tour, maybe, through history and the challenges we're facing now. We'll connect the dots to show how these things intersect and, importantly, why it matters to you. We want those aha moments, deep knowledge, but without the overwhelm.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning then. Before we get into the challenges, what is citizenship?
Fundamentally. Well, at its core, the sources define it as having the ability to influence the system you live in, political, social, economic systems, under a government you consent to, and with constitutionally protected freedoms. But it's changed a lot over time.
How so?
If you look way back, like ancient Greece, Athens, Sparta, citizenship was super exclusive, usually just freeborn males, often tied to owning land. It wasn't for everyone, not by a long shot.
Right, a privilege.
Exactly. Then you have the Roman Republic. Started limited, but it expanded. That Edict of Caracalla in 212 AD was huge, gave citizenship to nearly all free men in the empire. But here's the interesting bit, that expansion maybe dilute what it meant to be Roman? That's a question the sources raise.
So broadening access isn't always straightforwardly good.
It seems not, or at least Rome worried about it. They were really aware of, power getting concentrated. So they built these complex checks and balances, Senate, assemblies, tribunes. They learned from the Greeks, trying to avoid the instability of pure democracy or the tyranny of monarchs. And someone like Cicero really hammered home the idea that citizenship meant moral integrity, ethical duty. It wasn't just a status.
Okay, so it evolved from exclusive to expanded in Rome. Then what happened? Did it just disappear?
Pretty much. In the medieval period, it got replaced by feudal loyalties. You belong to your lord, not a state, not exactly empowering. But then, boom, the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Locke, Rousseau, they brought back these ideas of individual rights, responsibilities. That's the foundation for our modern view.
And how do we think about it today?
Usually we split it into two parts. There's legal citizenship, that's the formal bit, state recognition, rights, protections. And then there's active citizenship. That's about doing stuff, voting, getting involved in your community. But, and this is crucial, even if you have the legal status, things like your income, education, systemic barriers, they can stop you from being an active citizen.
Makes sense. And globally.
Yeah, globalization adds layers of complexity, right? Borders feel more porous. You have the issue of statelessness, people with no recognized citizenship at all. It's kind of sobering to realize only a fraction of people worldwide really get the full benefits.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. This next part really caught my eye in the materials, the role of the middle class. It's presented as almost a linchpin for democracy.
It really is. The sources talk about a self-sufficient middle class. The Greeks called them mesoi. These are folks who are, independent, self-employed, not super rich, not poor. They're seen as fundamental for political stability. They help balance interests. They get involved civically. It's interesting, even back in Athens, owning property meant you could participate politically without being economically dependent on someone else.
So that independence is key.
Totally. And you see it in modern history, too. The Arab Spring, for instance. Middle-class economic frustration was a huge driver. Or think about the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. Middle-class African Americans were absolutely pivotal in organizing and pushing for change, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Their relative economic stability gave them a platform.
So given how important this group is, what happens when it starts shrinking? What are the ripple effects we're seeing?
Well, the data points to what some are calling a silent crisis. It's reshaping America. We saw middle-class incomes basically stagnate between 2007 and 2017. Nominally, yeah, maybe a tiny increase, like 6.7% median household income. But factor in inflation. Purchasing power actually declined. Meanwhile, costs for essentials just exploded.
Like what?
Healthcare premiums went up roughly 30% in that decade. College tuition, over 30% increase at public four-year schools. And housing Wow. Median home price jumped from around $173,000 in 2012 to over $350,000 by 2021.
That's staggering. What about actually owning a home? That used to be the bedrock of middle-class security.
Exactly. And homeownership rates have dipped, peaked around 65% in 2000, down to 63% by 2017. It's driven by those crazy prices in places where the jobs are, like San Francisco, $1.5 million median home price. Or New York City rent, forget about it. Plus, lending got tighter after the 2008 crash. And this hits wealth building, especially passing wealth down generations. It makes it harder.
And this ties into worries about wealth concentration.
Absolutely. It makes you think of Aristotle warning about wealth concentration leading to oligarchy. Feels very relevant. We see the influence of money in politics today. Super PACs, massive lobbying spending, like the pharmaceutical industry spending over $300 million in just 2020. Then there's dark money, thanks to rulings like Citizens United, huge sums influencing elections, and you don't even know where it's coming from. No wonder trust in government is low.
So people feel squeezed and ignored.
Precisely. It leads to this widespread economic anxiety. Something like 70% of Americans are worried about their financial future. People put off big life things, marriage, kids. And while safety nets like unemployment or housing vouchers are essential, there's a debate, right? Some sources, like a Cato Institute study mentioned, suggest they might create dependency cycles. It's the same tension you see in the debate about universal basic income, UBI.
Right. The UBI debate, security versus dependency.
Exactly. Is it a safety floor, or does it change the fundamental relationship between work, contribution, and citizenship? It's a big question. And the overall fallout. More apathy, less political engagement, people being more susceptible to populist messages maybe. Think yellow vests in France or Trump's rise here. Social unrest, declining trust. It's all connected.
Okay, so we have economic pressure. Now let's talk about identity. What happens when tribalism challenges that shared sense of citizenship?
Yeah, tribalism is a major theme. When identity, especially along racial or ethnic lines, becomes more important than national loyalty, that really eats away at civic cohesion. History gives us some terrifying examples. The breakup of Yugoslavia in the 90s, ethnic cleansing, or Rwanda in 94, Hutu versus Tutsi, 800,000 people killed. That's identity conflict at its absolute worst.
Just horrifying examples. How does that kind of division show up today, maybe in less extreme ways?
Well, sociologically, strong in-group preference often means distrusting the out-group, that classic us versus them. It dampens civic engagement. Pew Research shows growing racial divides influencing how people vote in the U.S., for example. And politicians can exploit these divisions. They fracture that shared story, that national narrative. Populist movements often feed on this mistrust. And social media, well, it acts like an amplifier, right? Creating echo chambers.
So the digital age makes it worse.
It seems to. It creates these insulated communities where tribal voices get amplified, making shared understanding way harder. And we see ethno-nationalist movements gaining ground elsewhere, too, like in Hungary or Poland.
This brings us to something controversial mentioned in the sources. Critical race theory, CRT. How does that fit in?
It's presented with two sides. Proponents say CRT offers vital tools for understanding systemic inequality, how race has shaped laws and institutions. Critics, though, argue it's divisive. They say it emphasizes racial distinctions too much, potentially fosters exclusion, and might undermine broader goals of unity. The sources contrast this with the 1960s civil rights movement, framing it as focused on individual character over race, aiming for unity through shared humanity.
And what about policies designed to address inequality, like affirmative action, the idea of special rights?
That's another really contentious area, things like affirmative action or specific scholarships for minority groups. Supporters argue they're necessary to correct past and present injustices, to level the playing field and promote diversity. Opponents argue they violate meritocracy, maybe lead to reverse discrimination or perceived preferential treatment. They might point to that Harvard study suggesting higher standards for Asian American applicants.
Really tough balance.
It is. And then there's this concept raised, victimhood commodification. It's a provocative idea. The suggestion is that if society rewards claims of suffering, it might incentivize people to, amplify grievances or even fake affiliations to gain benefits. The risk, the sources argue, is undermining social trust and merit.
Wow, okay. Shifting focus again, let's talk borders. How does the physical concept of a border intersect with citizenship and national identity?
Borders are way more than lines on a map, aren't they? They define who we are politically and culturally. Think back to those ancient Greek city-states again, Athens and Sparta. Their physical borders shaped everything. Athens, being coastal, was more open to trade and outside ideas. Sparta, landlocked and rugged, turned inward, fostering militarism and demanding conformity, like through their intense agoge training.
So the physical boundary shapes the social reality. What about today, when borders seem blurrier?
Well, the sources discuss the impact of, let's say, less controlled immigration. The argument presented is that abandoning defined borders or lacking clear assimilation plans can weaken that shared identity needed for a nation-state. It can also put a real strain on public services, schools, healthcare, policing. We saw Germany grapple with this after taking in over 1 million refugees in 2015.
And does that strain lead to social divisions?
It can. The sources link insufficient assimilation strategies to social isolation for newcomers, potentially leading to what they term parallel societies. Think of the banlieues in France, or issues reported in parts of Sweden where distinct cultural norms might clash with the mainstream. It creates friction. There's also the whole debate around language, undocumented immigrant versus illegal alien. Proponents push for empathetic terms. Critics say it obscures the legal and policy issues. Look at DACA, or Canada's express entry changing terms didn't magically solve the underlying policy challenges.
So who benefits from, say, illegal immigration, according to these sources? It's often portrayed quite negatively.
The sources try to present an impartial look. Several groups are identified. First, some employers, particularly in sectors like agriculture, construction, hospitality, they might benefit from lower wages or avoiding regulations, though obviously this comes with huge risks of exploitation for the workers themselves.
Like a vulnerable workforce.
Exactly. Second, potentially consumers through lower prices for goods and services. But the flip side is potentially depressing wages for legal workers in those same jobs and maybe discouraging innovation. Third, there's a political dimension. The sources mention the assertion that the Democratic Party might court this group for electoral gain, advocating policies like sanctuary cities or pathways to citizenship. Critics see this as undermining rule of law.
Okay.
And finally, the immigrants themselves. Despite facing incredible hardship, discrimination, fear, the chance to earn money, often sending remittances home, is a powerful draw. It can be a lifeline for families back home, say, in Mexico. But again, that doesn't erase the exploitation they face here.
Got it. So amidst all these pressures, economic, social, border-related, who's actually running the show, this brings us to the idea of the administrative state.
Right, the rise of the admin state. This describes a really significant shift where power has sort of quietly moved from citizens and elected officials towards bureaucratic experts, unelected ones. It wasn't overnight. It started way back in the progressive era, late 1800s, early 1900s. Reformers thought trained professionals could manage complex problems better, so we got agencies like the Federal Reserve. But the side effect was sometimes sidelining public opinion, maybe laying groundwork for overreach. Prohibition is sometimes cited as an example.
So it grew gradually.
Yeah, in waves. The Great Depression brought the New Deal, huge expansion of federal programs, setting precedents for government safety nets. World War II expanded bureaucracy further for the war effort, reinforcing the idea that bureaucracy could be efficient. Then the 1960s Great Society programs added more federal agencies tackling poverty and civil rights. Each step expanded that administrative layer.
And this connects to the idea of the deep state.
That's the term used, yeah. It refers to this idea of an informal network within government operating somewhat independently from elected leaders. Examples cited include past CIA covert actions or Edward Snowden's NSA revelations about mass surveillance. Things like that really damaged public trust. Remember that poll? Only 35% trust in government officials in 2020. When policy feels like it's being made by unelected people, maybe prioritizing institutional goals over what the public wants, well, people feel disillusioned. Disengaged.
Feels like power is slipping away from the citizen.
That's the concern. And it leads to this issue of usurpation of powers, where agencies start doing things that traditionally belong to different branches of government. The EPA is used as an example. It makes regulations like Congress does. It enforces them like the executive branch, and it adjudicates disputes like the courts. When one agency does all three, it weakens those checks and balances. There are also concerns about resources, like the EPA having SWAT teams. Does that make sense? Or does it divert funds from, say, education or research and just create mistrust?
How does this square with the original constitutional ideas?
Well, the founders were wary of centralized power, right? Madison wrote about it in the Federalist Papers. They wanted localized governance, individual freedoms protected by the Bill of Rights. Today, you see debates that touch this nerve. Abolishing the Electoral College, reforming the Supreme Court, packing the court. These are arguments about the fundamental structures designed to limit pure majority rule or central power. Proponents see needed reforms. Opponents see threats to the system's stability.
And what about federalism? The state versus federal power balance.
That gets complicated, too. The sources point out what they call an inconsistent application by progressives. For example, supporting local autonomy for sanctuary cities, but pushing for federal control on things like gun laws or environmental rules. Critics argue this selective approach weakens the overall principle of federalism and the rule of law. And finally, there's even a shift in how we talk about rights. The Constitution focused on negative rights, protecting you from government. Now there's more talk of positive rights, what government should provide, like housing or healthcare, plus the whole free speech versus hate speech debate. Does focusing on group identities sometimes overshadow individual rights and responsibilities? These are deep questions being debated.
Okay, one last major area from the sources.
Okay.
Globalism. Is it cooperation, or is it, as one source puts it, conquest by another name?
That's the provocative framing, yeah. The critical view presented is that globalism can act like a subtle conquest. It might dilute the nation-state, erode citizen rights, and push an agenda favored by global elites. You can draw parallels, the sources suggest, to older forms of colonialism or imperialism, where powerful nations expanded their reach, often claiming it was for the benefit of others.
How does that play out economically?
It can create new kinds of dependency. Think about how much China's growth relied on global markets. But for other countries, this global integration can stifle their own local industries. Some African economies, for instance, might end up primarily supplying raw materials, kind of like in colonial times. Neocolonialism, some call it. A big point is how nations give up some control to international bodies, the UN, WTO, IMF. Their decisions aren't always transparent, and critics say they often favor elite interests. Trade deals like NAFTA faced criticism for hurting workers and local economies in the US and Mexico.
And the EU and Brexit fit here, too.
Absolutely. The EU is a prime example of that tension between national sovereignty and this larger supranational governance. Brexit was a huge visible pushback against that trend.
Is it just economic or cultural, too?
There's definitely a cultural dimension. The spread of global brands, Hollywood movies, fast food. It can lead to a kind of cultural homogenization. Critics worry this marginalizes local traditions, languages. They see it as a form of cultural imperialism. And politically, trying to impose one model of governance everywhere, like Western-style democracy, can backfire badly if it ignores local history and context. Think about the interventions in Iraq.
So given all this, the sources raise this intriguing idea. Are rogue nations actually necessary? A necessary evil, maybe?
It's a challenging thought. The idea is that nations like North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, states that defy the global order, might actually serve a purpose. They disrupt the status quo, forcing established powers like the US or China to rethink their strategies, maybe engage diplomatically when they otherwise wouldn't. They can also expose weaknesses in international institutions like the UN or the WHO and push for reforms. Think about debates around nuclear proliferation spurred by North Korea or pandemic response after COVID.
But surely there are huge risks.
Oh, absolutely. The sources acknowledge that. These states destabilize regions, they fuel conflict, they often create humanitarian crises. It's not endorsing them, it just raises the question of whether their disruption, despite the dangers, sometimes acts as an unintended catalyst for change in the global system. It creates this dilemma. Do you engage or isolate? There's no easy answer.
Okay, wow. We have covered a lot of ground here. We've unpacked these really profound forces challenging American citizenship, the erosion of the middle class, this rise of tribalism, the questions around borders, the growth of the administrative state, and these complex dynamics of globalism.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? And it leads back to that question from the sources. Is American citizenship basically a patient on life support? The challenges are huge, no doubt. But the material also suggests hope isn't lost. It emphasizes the power of active citizenship. For you, for everyone listening.
So what can people actually do?
Well, the sources point to things like vigilance, paying attention, upholding constitutional values, maybe through groups like the ACLU, or just defending free speech, prioritizing civic education programs like We the People get mentioned, and crucially, collective action. Think about the impact of movements like the Women's March or Black Lives Matter. Grassroots engagement matters.
So the future isn't set in stone.
Not at all. The takeaway from the sources seems to be that it hinges on this interplay, this constant back and forth between the protections we have in our institutions and the activism that comes from the ground up. Ultimately, it's about how citizens, how you, choose to engage and shape those economic, social, and political structures. That's the final thought to leave you with.